One of the roles of muscle is, of course, to provide movement and thus generate force. But if we look, there's something known as the length tension relationship of muscle. And if we looked at the length of the muscle and we graph that in relation to the tension or the force that it generates, we can see that it is not always optimal. That if the muscle fiber at rest is short, right, it does not generate much force, right? But as we lengthen the muscle, force goes up and then it sort of goes up and it will hit a maximum force before, as we lengthen it, it starts to come down. So if we make it too long, the amount of force goes down. So remember from our discussion on sarcomeric anatomy that there were elastic fibers inside of that muscle cell. So you have what is referred to as an optimal length, right? Where you generate the optimal amount or the maximum amount of force. So that is when the fiber or the sarcomere is stretched just a little bit to put just a little bit of tension on those elastic fibers so that you get a little bit of pullback from those elastic fibers and you get the contractile force as well. So this window here, right, is your optimal length for the muscle to generate the massive amounts of force. It's one of the reasons that like baseball pitchers do a wind up before they throw, and it sort of takes those muscles and it stretches them out just a little bit before they are to fire and generate that force. Because if we stretch them just a little bit, we will generate that force that we get out of that muscle. So then remember, right, the job of the muscle is to generate that force and potentially move some sort of item. So if we take a muscle and we attach it to a bench or something like that, right? So we'll just draw our muscle. This is our muscle here. Okay, and then we're going to attach it to some sort of weight down here. Okay, now what we can do is we can actually contract that muscle and that weight will move. We sort of make the muscle a little bit more belly shaped like this. Right? And so when we do that, the weight moves itself, right? So if we look, what we're seeing here is that the force, right, is greater than the load. So the force is greater than the load itself. Now, what we can do additionally is we can contract that muscle to a certain degree in a sense where the force on the muscle is not enough to move the load itself. So when we contract a muscle, we have the load in the same spot, right? So it does not move. So what we have here is that the force is equal to or less than the load itself, right? So if we have the force is greater than the load and the load moves, this is known as an isotonic contraction. Right? If we have the force is less than or equal to the load such that the load does not move during contraction, this is known as an isometric contraction, right? So you have isotonic versus isometric. So one, isotonic, it moves. Isometric, it does not move. In your isotonic contractions, where the load moves, right, you have two different types of contraction movements. You have one at which when the muscle contracts, it moves the load and the muscle is actually shortening during contraction, right? So this is a concentric contraction. Okay, now you can have a contraction where the muscle actually lengthens, right? So think about lowering a weight. This is where we're generating enough force to control the load, right? We're not letting it slam down on the ground, right? But we're lengthening our muscles. This is known as an eccentric contraction. Okay? And in an eccentric contraction, right, the muscle is lengthening while it's contracting under a controlled manner. Okay? So you can have isotonic, you can have isometric contractions to dictate how the muscle moves itself, right? But we got to remember that we want to generate maximum force by keeping the muscle at its optimal length prior to contraction. Now, with our movements, right, we don't often have movements that are set up like this. We have what we call lever systems, right, where our muscles are set up on levers to generate the movement. And there are three classes of lever system. There's class 1, class 2, and there is class 3 lever systems. So these lever systems essentially work to reduce the amount of force that is necessary in order to move the load. So when we look at lever systems, our lever system is always going to have a force, right? Or what you will see abbreviated in effort, right? You will have a load, which is the resistance to the movement, and you will have something known as a fulcrum, right? So these are the three components of the lever system. The class 1 lever system is your classic teeter-totter lever system, where you have the fulcrum, the pivot point in the middle, you have the load on one side, and you have the effort on the other side. So you can think of this as like the neck muscles, the posterior neck muscles, where if you have your sort of head, right, and you have a muscle that's back here, right, as we pull down on that muscle, your face gets pulled up in this direction, and your fulcrum is the vertebral column, right? So that is a class 1 lever system. In a class 2 lever system, you have one where the pivot point or the fulcrum is sort of on the outside. You have the load that is in the middle, and you have the effort, which is on the outside, right? So this is kind of like, you think about like a wheelbarrow, but if you think about sort of the calf, like here's your ankle, here's your foot, okay? Right, what you have is you have the muscle out here, right, which is pulling up, right? So there's your effort. Your load is the weight of your body here, and your fulcrum is your foot, okay? And then the class 3 lever system is one in which the fulcrum is on the end, right? You have the effort in the middle and the load on the outside. So this is sort of like the bicep example that I used earlier, right? Where you have, here's your bicep, your fulcrum is here, the pivot is the elbow, there's your effort, and then your load is out here. Okay, so that's your class 3 lever systems. Now these lever systems are all designed so that you can reduce the amount of force in order to generate enough force to move the load, right? So with that, right, there are what we call speed lever systems and power lever systems. And a speed lever system is one that moves very fast, but it doesn't move a whole lot of weight. It doesn't move at a large distance, right? Your power levers move a lot of weight, but they don't move them very far, and they don't move them very fast. And that is all dictated by the overall arrangement of your fulcrum, your load, and your effort.